Welcome to StoryVerse, where stories speak and you learn English naturally.
Chapter 1. The Treasure Valley. There once was a valley so beautiful that even the winds paused to admire it. The sun rested gently on its slopes, and the rain came softly like a blessing. Its apple trees were so red they glowed against the green hills. The corn stood tall and golden like a field of light, and the grapes shimmered in shades of deep blue. People from faraway towns called it the Treasure Valley, for every inch of it seemed touched by magic. A place where the earth gave more than it ever took. In that valley lived 3 brothers, Hans, Schwartz, and the youngest, Gluck. They had inherited the land from their father, a man once known for his fairness and generosity. But after his death, the valley fell under darker hands. Hans and Schwartz, though rich in gold, were poor in heart. Their eyes gleamed not with kindness, but with greed. They cared little for the beauty around them, and even less for the people who depended on them. They were known throughout the countryside as the Black Brothers, not for the color of their clothes, but for the darkness in their souls. Every morning, Hans would walk through the fields, not to admire the ripened fruit, but to shout at the workers. If a single apple fell to the ground, he would scold them harshly. Schwartz was worse, cunning and cold. He kept the money locked in a chest and counted it every night, as if afraid the coins might slip away in their sleep. And then there was little Gluck, gentle, quiet, and full of wonder. He had the same golden hair as his mother, and a heart too soft for such a cruel house. While his brothers barked orders, Gluck watered the plants, fed the birds, and spoke kindly to the servants. He found joy in the simplest things: the sound of the wind, the shimmer of sunlight on the river, and the laughter of children playing near the fields. But kindness in a cruel home is a lonely gift. Hans and Schwartz made Gluck do all the work in the house: sweeping, cooking, cleaning, fetching water from the well, while they feasted and rested. When he smiled, they mocked him. When he sang, they ordered him to be silent. Still, Gluck never complained. He believed that one day goodness would return to the valley, and perhaps even his brothers might learn to be kind. Yet the valley had begun to change. The wind no longer carried the same soft tune. The clouds that once brought gentle rain now passed by without stopping. The river that wound through the meadows grew thinner with each passing month. The farmers whispered that the spirit of the west wind, the guardian of the valley, had grown angry. They said he had seen the cruelty of the Black Brothers and turned his face away. And without his blessing, no rain could fall. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of red, the spirit of the west wind rose over the mountains in a storm of silver clouds. His voice rolled through the valley like thunder. "You have poisoned this land with your greed," he cried. "Your hearts are as dry as your fields shall be. No drop of rain shall bless your valley again until mercy returns to your souls." The people trembled in fear, but the brothers only laughed. "Let the wind rage if it must," said Hans. "We have gold enough to buy water from the next town." But no gold could buy what nature refused to give. The weeks turned into months, and the sun burned hotter each day. The soil cracked, the crops withered, and the once glittering river became nothing more than a thread of dust. The vines shriveled on the hillsides, the apples rotted on the trees, and the Treasure Valley, once a paradise, became a land of red sand and silence. The people began to leave, carrying what little they had left. They cursed the names of the Black Brothers as they went, for everyone knew that it was their cruelty that had brought the curse. At last, even the brothers could find nothing to live on. The gold they had hoarded was of no use in a place where no bread could be bought. The workers were gone, the animals dead, and the house that once echoed with laughter now stood in cold emptiness. One morning, Hans looked out from the window at the barren land and said bitterly, "There is nothing for us here. We must go beyond the mountains and find fortune elsewhere." And so, the three brothers left the treasure valley. Hans and Schwartz walked ahead, speaking of the wealth they would gain, while little Gluck followed behind, clutching a small bag with the few things he owned: a loaf of bread, a wooden cross, and his one precious possession, a golden mug that had belonged to his mother. As they climbed the rocky path out of the valley, Gluck turned for a final look. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the ghostly sound of what once was: the laughter of children, the songs of birds, the whisper of the river. His eyes filled with tears. "I will come back," he said softly. "One day, this valley will live again." But the spirit of the west wind, hidden among the clouds, only sighed. For he knew that before the treasure valley could bloom again, its people, and especially its keepers, would have to learn what true treasure meant. And thus began the journey of the three brothers, two driven by greed, and one guided by hope, into a world where gold glimmered, hearts were tested, and the promise of the Golden River waited silently beyond the mountains. Chapter 2. The Golden Mug. The road beyond the valley was long and unkind. For many days, the three brothers wandered from village to village, carrying what little they could. The world beyond their home was cold to them, for their reputation had spread faster than the wind. No one trusted the Black Brothers. Where they begged for work, doors were closed. Where they asked for shelter, they were turned away. They found an old stone house on the far side of the mountains, a lonely place with creaking shutters and a roof that whistled when the wind blew. It was there they chose to live, surviving on the gold and silver they had once hoarded from the treasure valley. But gold does not last forever when greed holds the purse. The coins that once filled their chests began to vanish, one by one, until all that remained was dust and hunger. Gluck worked from dawn to night, keeping the house clean, fetching water from the frozen stream, and cooking what little they had. But the fire in the hearth grew smaller every day, and the cupboards were bare. One bitter evening, when the sky outside turned dark with snow, Hans slammed his fist on the wooden table. "We are ruined," he growled. "There is nothing left but this cursed house and that useless mug of yours, Gluck." Schwartz's sharp eyes glinted in the firelight. "Yes," he sneered, "the golden mug. Melt it down. We can sell the gold and buy food." Gluck clutched the mug to his chest. It was the only thing left from his mother. Smooth, shining, and beautifully carved with small vines that caught the light like threads of sunlight. His mother had called it her joy, saying that it brought blessings when filled with kindness. "Please, brothers," Gluck said softly, his voice trembling. "It's all I have left of her." But Hans snatched it from his hands. "Then you'll have your memories to eat," he said coldly. They threw the mug into the melting pot that stood near the fire. The flames licked at its surface, and slowly the gold began to soften, glowing red, then orange, then a deep, molten yellow. The brothers, satisfied, went out into the night to find someone who might buy the gold once it was ready. They left Gluck alone to tend the fire. The room was silent except for the soft crackle of wood and the faint hiss of melting metal. Gluck sat by the hearth, his eyes wet with tears. He thought of his mother's hands holding the mug, of the laughter that used to fill their home before greed had stolen it all away. As the flames grew higher, the pot shimmered strangely. Gluck wiped his eyes and leaned closer. That was when he heard it. A voice. A thin, metallic whisper. Soft, but clear. "Pour me out," it said. "I am too hot." Gluck froze. He looked around the room, but no one was there. Only the fire flickered in the shadows. "Pour me out," the voice said again, sharper this time. "I'm too hot." The sound seemed to come from the pot itself. Gluck's heart pounded. He stepped closer, trembling, and peered into the glowing gold. "Who's there?" he whispered. "Pour me out," cried the voice once more, echoing from deep within the molten glow. Though frightened, Gluck took the handle of the pot with a cloth and carefully began to pour. As the golden liquid streamed out, something incredible happened. First came a pair of tiny yellow legs, then a pair of golden coattails, then a round, shining little body, and last, a small face, bright as sunlight, with curls of gold hair and eyes that gleamed like molten amber. Before Gluck's astonished eyes, the pieces came together on the floor, forming the strangest little creature he had ever seen. No taller than a foot, dressed entirely in gold, his boots shining like stars. The small figure brushed the dust from his sleeves, straightened his coat, and looked up at Gluck. "Well, my boy," he said briskly, his voice ringing like the chime of a bell. "You seem surprised." Gluck could only stare. Who are you?" he managed to whisper. The little man smiled, his golden curls glinting in the firelight. "I am the king of the Golden River," he said proudly, "and I have been watching you." Gluck blinked, wondering if he had fallen asleep and begun to dream, but the golden man's eyes were full of light, alive and knowing. "You are not like your brothers," the king continued. "I have seen how they treated you, and how you bore it without hatred. You have a kind heart, Gluck. A rare thing in this world." The little king walked slowly toward the fire, the tips of his golden boots making a soft musical sound on the stone floor. "Listen carefully," he said, turning to Gluck with sudden seriousness. "What I am about to tell you can change your fate, but only if your heart remains as pure as it is now." Gluck nodded, afraid to breathe. "Whoever climbs to the top of the mountain from which the Golden River falls," said the king, "and casts into its waters 3 drops of holy water, shall see its stream turn to gold. But remember this, only the first attempt will succeed, and if anyone dares to pour unholy water into the river, his heart will be turned to stone, and his body to black rock." Gluck's eyes widened. "The Golden River turns to gold?" The king smiled softly. "Yes, but only for one who gives without greed." The fire crackled as the king's golden form shimmered brighter and brighter. "Do not speak of this lightly," he said. "Great gifts come with great testing. Remember what I've told you, and perhaps one day your valley will live again." Before Gluck could ask another word, the king turned toward the flames. His body began to glow like molten sunlight. "Wait," cried Gluck. "Don't go." But the king only smiled once more. "When the time is right, I will return." And with that, he stepped straight into the fire and vanished up the chimney in a burst of golden sparks. Gluck stood there for a long moment, the room quiet except for the faint whisper of smoke. He looked down at the hearth where the molten gold had been, but the pot was empty. The mug, his last treasure, was gone. Outside, the wind howled across the mountains. Inside, a small boy stood alone by the dying fire, his heart heavy with wonder, fear, and a strange new hope. For though he had lost his golden mug, he had gained something far greater, a secret that could bring back life, light, and the soul of the Treasure Valley. Chapter 3. Hans's Greed. The morning sun rose cold and distant over the barren land that was once the Treasure Valley. Where golden fields once danced in the wind, only dust now stirred in silence. Hans, the eldest of the Black brothers, stood before the ruins of their house, his face hard as the cracked earth beneath his feet. There was no softness in his eyes, no regret, only the same burning hunger that had always ruled his heart. The words of the king of the Golden River echoed in his mind like a promise of power. 3 drops of holy water, and the river shall flow with gold. To Hans, it was not a warning, but an opportunity. Gold is meant for the strong, he muttered to himself. And I, Hans, will have it all. He set out before dawn, clutching a small flask of holy water he had stolen from the church. The priest had refused him the blessing, for even the man of God could see the greed burning in his soul. But Hans did not care. He believed no divine power could stop his will. The journey up the mountain was harsh and steep. The wind howled like an angry spirit, carrying with it the whispers of the valley's sorrow. The path grew narrower, and the rocks beneath his boots crumbled with every step. Yet Hans pressed on, driven by visions of gold. Gold enough to rebuild the valley, gold enough to make him a king. As he climbed higher, he came across a small dog lying by the path. Its ribs showed through its thin fur, and its eyes pleaded silently for help. The poor creature whined softly, too weak to move. Hans frowned. "Out of my way, you wretched thing," he hissed. "Do you think I carry water for beasts?" And with a cruel kick of his boot, he left the dog behind to die. Further up, the sun beat down mercilessly, and the path turned to dust. A small child appeared, pale, barefoot, and trembling. The child reached out a hand. "Please, sir," he whispered, "a drop of water. Just a drop." Hans clenched his flask tighter. "Get away, boy," he barked. "This water is worth more than your life." The child's eyes filled with tears, but Hans walked on, his heart as dry as the stones beneath his feet. At last, near the summit, Hans saw an old man sitting on a rock. His hair was white as snow, his lips cracked from thirst. "Traveler," the man croaked, "the sun has burned me dry. Share a drop of your water, and God will bless your journey." Hans sneered. "God blesses those who help themselves," he said coldly, stepping past the dying man without a second glance. When he reached the edge of the Golden River, the air shimmered with strange light. The waters glowed softly, whispering secrets that only the pure of heart could hear. Hans knelt, trembling with excitement. He opened his flask and poured 3 drops into the river. For a moment, the world went silent. Then a terrible sound rose, a low rumble, deep and thunderous. The river turned dark, swirling like molten shadow. Hans tried to step back, but the ground beneath him cracked open. A blinding flash of light erupted, and where Hans once stood, there was nothing, only a jagged black stone glistening coldly in the mountain sun. The wind carried his last scream down into the empty valley below, a warning to all who would seek gold with a heart full of greed. Chapter 4. Schwartz's Pride. Days passed, and Hans did not return. The valley lay silent beneath a gray sky, and the wind carried whispers of something terrible upon the mountain. But Schwartz, the second brother, refused to believe his fate. Hans was careless, he said bitterly. He always was. The gold will be mine, mine alone. Where Hans's greed had burned like fire, Schwartz's pride stood colder, sharp and unyielding. He looked at the desolate fields around him, the cracked ground where crops once grew, and clenched his fists. "I will restore the treasure valley," he murmured, though his heart spoke a different truth. "I will be rich, and all will bow to me." Before setting out, he went to the village priest to buy holy water. The priest, having heard of Hans's fate, looked upon him with sorrow. "The river's gift is not for the proud or the selfish," he warned. "Go only if your heart is pure." Schwartz smiled coldly. "Purity is a luxury for fools," he said. When the priest refused him, he slipped gold coins into the trembling hands of a servant and bribed him for the sacred water. Pride had taught him that everything, even holiness, had a price. The next morning, he began his climb. The mountain loomed above him, dark and silent, as though mourning those who had fallen before. Yet Schwartz felt no fear. He walked with his head high, confident that his cleverness and strength would lead him to victory. Halfway up, he came upon the same old dog Hans had once abandoned. Its breathing was shallow, its eyes dull and clouded with pain. The creature whimpered, dragging itself weakly toward him. Schwartz frowned. "Filthy animal," he muttered, stepping aside. "I'm not wasting my strength on you." As he climbed further, he met the same child, frail, barefoot, his lips dry and trembling. "Please, sir," the boy whispered, his voice barely more than air. "Just a drop of water." Schwartz looked down at him with disdain. "I am not your servant," he snapped. "Find your own blessing." And he turned away, clutching the flask tightly to his chest. Soon after, a familiar figure appeared on the rocky path. A man hunched and weary, his eyes dim with exhaustion. "Traveler," the man said, "spare a drop of water for one who cannot go on." Schwartz hesitated, his heart trembling for the first time. There was something hauntingly familiar about that face, the sharp jaw, the proud brow. Then he saw it clearly. It was his brother Hans, pale and ghost-like, reaching out a trembling hand. "Help me," the ghost whispered. Schwartz staggered back in horror. "You're not real," he shouted. "You're just a trick of the wind." And he fled upward, refusing to look back, though the faint echo of Hans's voice followed him all the way to the summit. At last, he reached the golden river. Its waters shimmered beneath the sun, glowing softly like liquid light. Pride filled his chest as he knelt by the edge. "I am better than Hans," he declared. "The river will obey me." He uncorked the flask and let 3 drops of holy water fall into the stream. At first, nothing happened. Then the air grew heavy. The wind stopped, and the earth beneath him trembled. The waters darkened, swirling with violent power. The mountain roared like a living thing. Schwartz tried to run, but the ground crumbled beneath his feet. A great wave rose from the river, glittering with gold and shadow. It struck him with the force of a storm, pulling him down into its depths. When the light faded, another black stone stood beside Hans's, silent, cold, and unyielding. The brothers, once filled with pride and greed, now guarded the golden river forever, reminders of hearts that sought gold, but lost their souls. Chapter 5. Gluck's Journey. The valley was quiet now. Too quiet. No laughter, no harvest songs, no footsteps but Gluck's small ones echoing through the dust. The once golden fields lay dry and broken, and the house that had once been filled with noise now stood silent, empty, and cold. Hans and Schwartz were gone, swallowed by their own greed and pride, and little Gluck was left utterly alone. He stood at the door, looking toward the distant mountains, where the golden river shone faintly in the dying light. His heart trembled, but not from fear. "If the river can be turned to gold," he whispered softly, "then maybe it can bring back life to the valley." The next morning, Gluck walked to the small chapel on the hill. The priest, seeing the boy's gentle eyes and trembling hands, felt a deep pity for him. Without a word, he blessed a small flask of holy water and placed it in Gluck's palms. "My child," he said quietly, "the journey is long and cruel, but remember, a kind heart carries its own strength." Gluck nodded. "I'll try my best," he said, his voice barely above a breath. He began his climb just as dawn painted the sky with gold. The path was steep, and the stones cut his feet, but he pressed on. The wind howled cold and bitter, yet in his heart there was only hope. After hours of walking, he came upon a small dog lying by the path. The same frail creature that Hans and Schwartz had cast aside. Its body trembled weakly, and its eyes flickered like fading embers. Without a second thought, Gluck knelt beside it. "Poor thing," he whispered. "You're thirsty, aren't you?" He opened the flask and let a few drops fall between the dog's dry lips. "Here, drink this." "I can spare a little." The dog licked his fingers gently, and a faint spark of life returned to its eyes. Gluck smiled and rose, continuing his climb. As he reached a narrow bend, he saw a child sitting by the rocks, pale, barefoot. His lips cracked from thirst. The boy looked up weakly. "Please, sir," he said, "just one drop of water." Gluck's heart ached. He looked at his flask, already lighter than before, but he didn't hesitate. "Of course," he said, kneeling beside the child. "Here, take what you need." The boy drank, and for a moment a warm glow surrounded him. Then he smiled and vanished into the air like mist in the morning sun. Gluck blinked in wonder, but there was no time to think. He still had far to go. Higher and higher he climbed, until the wind grew fierce, and the mountains seemed alive with voices. Then he saw an old man sitting on a stone, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Traveler," the man said faintly, "I am dying. Share your water, that I might live a moment longer." Gluck felt tears in his eyes. The flask now held only a few precious drops. He looked at the mountain peak, so close, and then at the old man before him. Without a word, he handed the flask over. "Here," he said softly. "You need it more than I do." The old man drank, and suddenly the air changed. The cold wind turned warm. Flowers began to bloom where his tears had fallen. The gray stones sparkled with life and color. The mountain, once dead and cruel, seemed to breathe again. Gluck gasped as the old man smiled, his face transforming, his robes glowing with gold. In an instant, he became the radiant figure of the king of the Golden River. "My dear child," the king said gently, his voice echoing like music, "you have done what your brothers could not. You gave freely, with no thought of reward, and for that, the river shall be yours." He touched Gluck's forehead lightly. "Go now, Cast the water, and let kindness restore what greed destroyed. Gluck walked to the river's edge, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He tilted the flask and poured the last few drops into the shimmering water. At once, the river blazed with light. Gold, pure and living, flowing down into the valley below. The barren earth turned green. The trees stood tall again, and laughter returned with the sound of rushing water. The treasure valley lived once more. And though Gluck never sought wealth, his kindness brought him more than gold. It brought peace, love, and the gentle blessing of a golden heart. Chapter 6. The River of Gold. The mountains stood silent beneath the morning sky, glowing faintly in the light of dawn. Gluck knelt before the king of the golden river, his small hands trembling with wonder. The king's face shone with warmth, his golden robes rippling like sunlight on water. "My child," said the king softly, "you have proven that even in a heart burdened by sorrow, kindness can bloom. You gave when you had nothing, and because of that, you shall be the true master of the Golden River." He reached into the air, and from the mist, a white lily appeared, delicate and pure. From its petals rolled 3 shining drops of dew, each glowing with a light not of this world. "Take these," said the king, placing them in Gluck's palm. "Cast them into the river, and let your heart's goodness awaken the valley once more." Gluck nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. He walked toward the river's edge, where his brothers had met their fate. But the air felt different now, softer, forgiving. The stones beneath his feet seemed to hum with new life. He leaned forward and let the first drop fall. A gentle sound filled the air, like the laughter of children carried on the wind. The second drop fell, and the barren rocks burst into color, wildflowers unfolding in every shade of gold and green. Then came the third drop. As it touched the water, the entire river blazed with light, a radiant golden glow that flowed down the mountainside like liquid sunlight. The valley below stirred as though waking from a long, sorrowful sleep. The air grew rich with the scent of earth and rain. Trees rose tall and strong, crops pushed through the soil, and birds filled the skies once again. The treasure valley had been reborn. Gluck stood silently, watching the golden river wind its way through the fields. Its waters no longer promised greed or power. They whispered of hope, of compassion, of life renewed. When he returned home, he found the old cottage surrounded by blooming orchards and waving wheat. The people of the valley came to him for help, and Gluck shared all he had: food, shelter, kindness. Never once did he keep the gold for himself, for he had learned that the richest heart is the one that gives freely. Years passed, and Gluck grew older, but peace never left his eyes. The river continued to flow, golden in the sunlight, pure in the moonlight, not a treasure of the earth, but of the soul. And so, the legend lived on, that in the heart of a small boy, the king of the golden river found what all the gold in the world could not buy: the simple, unshakable goodness of a kind heart.